from here, you could see the Hollywood sign and you would have no idea.
What if everything you thought you knew about this story was a lie? What if, hidden beneath the polished surfaces, the smiling photographs, and the carefully constructed headlines, there lay a darker, messier, and far more explosive truth? That's the question I want you to hold in your mind as we step into this journey. Because once you hear what I'm about to share, you won't look at this tale, or the people at the center of it, the same way ever again. The air is thick with tension right now. Rumors swirl faster than the truth can catch up. Questions hang unanswered. And whispers, once spoken behind closed doors, have started echoing in public spaces. Why now? Why are these revelations bubbling to the surface at this very moment? That's not a coincidence. Timing is everything. And when something erupts after years of silence, it's rarely by accident. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about it. Why are some truths buried? Why are certain details scrubbed clean from public record? Why do powerful figures rewrite the past, even as they pretend to embrace transparency? There's always a reason. And when those reasons begin to unravel, they reveal more than anyone bargained for. I want you to picture this. Behind a grand facade, people we thought we understood are hiding battles we can't even imagine. Publicly, they project composure, authority, control. Privately, the cracks widen. The whispers turn into fights. And those who once swore loyalty start turning against each other. Doesn't that sound like a house built not on stone, but on quicksand? Now, here's the twist. What we're dealing with isn't just one story. It's a tapestry of interconnected secrets, betrayals, contradictions, and shocking ironies that stretch back further than anyone expected. Some of these revelations feel so outlandish, so impossible, that your first instinct might be to laugh. But when you see how the puzzle pieces connect, when you realize the pattern, the laughter stops, replaced instead by disbelief, and then by anger. Because here's the part that matters most. You're not just a spectator in this. You're implicated too. You've been fed the carefully curated narratives, the softened edges, the official accounts. Haven't you ever wondered why certain details never made sense? Haven't you noticed the contradictions nobody bothered to explain? Haven't you felt like something was missing, like there was a hidden hand pulling the strings? Let me ask you directly. What if the version of events you've believed all this time was carefully constructed to keep you calm, to stop you from asking too many questions? Wouldn't you want to dig deeper? Wouldn't you demand the truth? This is why this story matters now. Because at this moment, the cracks in the facade are widening so fast that those in power can't plaster over them anymore. The secrets they thought would stay buried forever are clawing their way to the surface. And once exposed, there's no going back. Take a breath, because what you're about to hear isn't just gossip. It isn't just speculation. It's the unraveling of carefully spun myths, the clash of loyalty and betrayal, the collision between what's real and what's been fabricated for public consumption. It's the kind of story that will leave you questioning not only the people at the center of it, but also the systems that allowed it all to happen. And don't be fooled. This isn't just about them. It's about us. About how easily we accept the story we're told. About how quickly we move on when something doesn't add up. And about the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the truth is more outrageous than the lie. So here's where I'll leave you for now. We've cracked open the door. We've caught a glimpse of what's inside. But we've only scratched the surface. Because what comes next will force you to rethink everything you thought you knew. And trust me, what comes next will change everything in ways no one saw coming. The introduction is complete. You said, go. ChatGPT said, what if the very first thread you pull in this tangled web doesn't just lead to one hidden truth, but unravels the entire fabric? That's where we begin. Because when you trace back to the origins of this story, you find not a clean beginning, but a trail of contradictions. A beginning filled with carefully orchestrated allusions, quiet whispers, and decisions that seemed insignificant at the time, but would one day ignite into full-blown scandal. It starts with one simple question. Why did certain figures rise so fast, while others, equally qualified, equally deserving, were pushed into the shadows? Doesn't it feel like someone, somewhere, was deciding who the world should pay attention to, and who should be forgotten? This isn't coincidence. This is strategy. And if you've ever wondered why some people dominate headlines while others vanish, the answer is buried in those early choices. Think about it. The foundations of every empire, whether royal, political, or corporate, are built not just on charisma and talent, but on manipulation, on alliances struck in back rooms, on deals that favor one side while quietly suffocating another. And in this story, the very roots of the drama lie in those early bargains. Now, picture the stage being set. A public debut, full of smiles and promises. Cameras flashing, applause echoing, the world seemingly enchanted. But behind the curtain, uneasy compromises, favors exchanged, promises that would one day become debts impossible to repay. That's the reality most never see. And it's where the rot begins. But here's where it gets chilling. The people we think of as powerful, they weren't always in control. They were pawns too, caught in a larger game. Their moves scripted, their images managed, their words rehearsed. And yet, every so often, the mask would slip. A single unscripted comment, a flash of irritation, a contradiction in the official narrative. Did you ever catch those moments? Did you ever feel that uneasy jolt, realizing something didn't quite add up? Here's a shocking fact. Archived interviews, buried articles, even official documents reveal that some of the earliest public appearances contained inconsistencies so glaring it's a wonder no one questioned them louder. One date that doesn't match. One witness whose story subtly shifts. One image that seems staged rather than spontaneous. Each detail small enough to dismiss alone. But together, they form a pattern. And patterns don't lie. Now, let's talk about the emotional stakes. Imagine being someone on the inside, watching the narrative spin further and further from the truth. Do you stay silent, knowing speaking out could destroy you? Or do you risk it all, becoming the lone voice against an empire of silence? It's a choice that haunted several insiders. And some of them, just some, chose to leave clues behind. Direct question for you. If you had stumbled across a hidden detail, a fact that could change everything, would you have spoken up? Or would fear have kept you quiet, knowing the storm you'd unleash? That's the moral dilemma at the heart of this opening chapter. And it's why this isn't just about them. It's about all of us and the choices we make when faced with uncomfortable truths. But let's not sugarcoat it. The story isn't just about silence. It's about betrayal. Friends who became enemies. Allies who switched sides when the winds shifted. Public declarations of loyalty that masked private resentment. And as these rifts widened, cracks started to show in the pristine facade. The audience, the world, didn't notice at first. But hindsight makes the signs impossible to miss. Do you see the pattern now? A carefully built narrative, undermined from within by hidden fractures. A story the world thought it understood, actually riddled with holes. And yet, here's the most shocking twist. Those early cracks weren't accidents. They were warnings. Warnings ignored. Warnings dismissed. Warnings that, if taken seriously, might have stopped the chaos before it spiraled. But it did spiral. And the consequences? Far greater than anyone could have imagined. And just when you think you've understood the scope of the betrayal, when you believe you've pieced together the contradictions, something else emerges. Something buried deeper. Something that doesn't just question the narrative, it obliterates it. Because the real story doesn't begin where we thought it did. It begins somewhere far more dangerous. And uncovering that starting point will take us into places no one dared to go. And what comes next will make even the boldest revelations feel tame by comparison. What if I told you the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in just enough truth to make them believable? That's exactly how this story advances. By now, the cracks are visible, the inconsistencies undeniable. But what happens next takes us deeper into the machinery that created those illusions in the first place. Because this isn't just about individuals making mistakes. It's about a system designed to protect the powerful at any cost. And when that system starts bending reality, the result is chaos. Let's start with a scene. Imagine a carefully planned gathering, lavish, polished, meant to dazzle the world. Every smile rehearsed, every word measured, every camera angle chosen to project perfection. But behind those glittering lights, tension simmers. Eyes flash with resentment. Whispers cut sharper than applause. Doesn't that sound familiar? Because this isn't just one event. It's a pattern, repeated again and again. Here's the contradiction. In public, unity was displayed. In private, daggers were drawn. How many times have you seen two people smile together for a photograph, knowing deep down they despise each other? That's the irony here. Performance is meant for us, the audience, designed to conceal the real battles happening just off stage. But here's a shocking detail that most overlooked. Certain records, preserved in forgotten corners of archives, reveal meetings where decisions were made not for truth, but for optics. Who gets praised? Who gets blamed? Who disappears from the narrative altogether? One insider later admitted, "We weren't telling the story. We were writing a script." Imagine the weight of that confession. Now, let's turn this on you. How often have you accepted what's placed before you simply because it looked polished, official, authoritative? Did you ever question the selective framing of events? The photographs that only told half the story? The press releases that avoided the most uncomfortable questions? We all fall into that trap. And that's exactly how the system keeps its grip, because questioning is uncomfortable and believing is easy. But here's where things take a darker turn. Those who dared to ask questions didn't just face criticism. They faced exile. Their credibility destroyed. Their names dragged through the mud. Conveniently, their voices drowned out before they could reveal too much. Doesn't that sound less like coincidence and more like a deliberate tactic? The emotional cost of this suppression can't be overstated. Imagine being silenced, not because you lied, but because you were too close to the truth. Imagine watching lies celebrated while truth became dangerous. Wouldn't that crush you? Wouldn't it break your faith in everything around you? For many insiders, it did. And yet, some of them, those rare few, decided to keep fighting, leaving behind fragments of truth that, years later, we can piece together. Let me throw another direct question your way. If the price of truth was your reputation, your career, even your safety, would you still tell it? Or would you, like so many before, choose silence, hoping someone else might take the risk instead? And then came the tipping point, a moment when the facade almost cracked in real time. A misstep so glaring it was impossible to ignore. Cameras caught it. Journalists whispered about it. Insiders panicked. And for the briefest instant, the world saw a glimpse of what lay beneath. But almost immediately, the spin machine roared back to life. Damage control went into overdrive. And the truth? Buried again. Except this time, something was different. This time, the cover-up left fingerprints. Clues so sloppy they couldn't be erased. And once those fingerprints were noticed, they led straight to places no one wanted us to look. This is the moment where the story stops being about appearances and starts being about power. Raw, unflinching power. The kind that bends narratives, silences dissent, and rewrites reality. And once you understand how that power operates, you can never look at the official story the same way again. Because here's the real danger. This isn't just a tale of betrayal. It's a blueprint for control. And the more you see how the blueprint works, the more you realize how much of what you've been told about this story and so many others has been carefully engineered. But don't get too comfortable, because the next revelation doesn't just peel back the curtain, it tears it down completely. And what comes after will force us to confront not just who lied, but why. Have you ever noticed how the biggest explosions often come from the smallest sparks? That's exactly what happens here. We've traced the cracks in the foundation. We've seen the system flex its power to control the narrative. But in this chapter, the story shifts into something far more volatile. Because one seemingly minor incident, dismissed by most at the time, became the match that ignited everything. Picture the scene. A casual remark, thrown out in what seemed like an offhand conversation. Not scripted, not planned, and certainly not approved by the gatekeepers of the narrative. It was a line meant to pass unnoticed, but it didn't. It spread, first quietly, through whispers and speculation, then louder, until it began appearing in headlines, comments, and public debates. Why? Because for once, it didn't sound polished. It sounded real. And that reality, raw, unscripted, was a direct threat. Suddenly, the carefully balanced image began wobbling. The system panicked. Rebuttals were issued. Explanations crafted. Excuses rehearsed. But it was too late. The audience, the public, had caught a glimpse of something genuine, and they couldn't unsee it. Here's where the contradiction slaps you in the face. For years, we were told to trust the polished version, to ignore the inconvenient details. But the moment authenticity slipped through, people latched onto it. Doesn't that tell you something? That deep down, no matter how elaborate the performance, we crave the truth, even when it's messy, uncomfortable, and dangerous. Now, here's a surprising fact you won't find plastered across mainstream coverage. Several insiders later admitted that this minor moment was treated as a full-scale emergency behind closed doors. Meetings were called, strategies rewritten, loyalty questioned. One insider described the atmosphere as a house of cards trembling in the wind. Let me put the question to you. Why would a simple remark, barely a sentence long, terrify the powerful so much? Unless, of course, it revealed more than it should have. Unless it hinted at something bigger, something they'd spent years burying. That's the emotional core of this chapter, fear. Not the fear of the powerless, but the fear of those who had everything to lose. And when the powerful get scared, they don't retreat. They attack. The smear campaigns began almost instantly. Distracting stories pushed to the forefront. Carefully timed scandals unleashed against anyone who dared repeat the dangerous remark. And just like that, the narrative machine went into overdrive, determined to smother the spark before it became an inferno. But here's the irony. They failed. Because the harder they tried to bury it, the more people dug. The louder they shouted denials, the more suspicious the audience became. It's a phenomenon you've probably seen play out elsewhere. Silence sometimes protects you, but overreaction exposes you. And this overreaction was so dramatic, so clumsy, it had the opposite effect. Instead of calming suspicions, it inflamed them. Let's pause here and ask directly. If someone goes out of their way to convince you that a detail doesn't matter, doesn't that make you think it matters even more? And the emotional toll? Tremendous. On those inside the circle, the pressure became unbearable. Fingers pointed in every direction. Who slipped? Who let the truth out? Trust shattered. Paranoia flourished. And as alliances crumbled, the fragile unity they had fought to maintain finally began collapsing under its own weight. Yet, here's the twist that makes this chapter unforgettable. What if that small spark wasn't an accident? What if it was deliberate? A calculated risk by someone on the inside who wanted to watch the entire machine burn? The possibility lingers, unanswered, haunting every step that followed. Because whether accidental or intentional, the damage was done. The facade wasn't just cracked, it was fractured. And once fractured, nothing could restore it to its original shine. Which leads us to the next stage of this story, the moment when whispers turned into accusations, and accusations into open warfare. And what follows next will shatter not just trust within the circle, but the very narrative they fought so hard to protect. Have you ever wondered what happens when whispers can no longer be contained behind closed doors? When suspicion finally bursts out into the open, and those who once smiled side by side begin openly accusing one another. That's the shift we're stepping into now. The game has changed. What started as cracks in the facade has turned into outright fractures, and the mask of unity is gone. It begins with one undeniable moment. A confrontation. Not in the shadows, not whispered behind the safety of locked doors, but right there in plain sight, visible to anyone sharp enough to notice. A single glance that lingered too long. A tone sharper than it should have been. An exchange that didn't match the polished script of unity. The kind of thing most people might dismiss. But for those paying attention, it was the spark of open conflict. And here's where it gets explosive. Those carefully crafted images of loyalty and cooperation suddenly clash with the undeniable reality of animosity. Doesn't it strike you as ironic? That the same people who built entire narratives around harmony and tradition couldn't even mask their disdain in the moments that mattered most? Here's a chilling detail. Documents later revealed that what the public saw was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, accusations were flying. Who leaked what? Who failed to cover up a mistake? Who was secretly feeding stories to journalists? Imagine the paranoia, the finger-pointing, the frantic attempts to restore control. And imagine the fury when each new attempt only deepened the chaos. Let me ask you this directly. If the people you trusted most suddenly turned on you, would you fight back, or would you stay quiet, waiting for your chance to strike later? That's the emotional weight crushing everyone in this chapter. Betrayal isn't just painful, it's destabilizing. Friendships that once felt unbreakable now seem hollow. Promises ring false. And each accusation leaves scars, making reconciliation impossible. And here's the contradiction that tears everything apart. The very system built on secrecy suddenly found itself drowning in exposure. Leaks multiplied. Stories once dismissed as speculation gained credibility. Journalists who had been silenced now had The irony couldn't be sharper. For years, they controlled the narrative with an iron grip. And now, they were losing it one headline at a time. One insider described it as watching the walls close in, with no exit in sight. But what made this chapter unforgettable wasn't just the fighting, it was the strategy. Accusations weren't random. They were calculated. Each revelation timed to inflict maximum damage. Each leak designed not just to expose, but to humiliate. Doesn't that sound less like a breakdown and more like a war plan? Now, here's a surprising twist. Some of the loudest accusations didn't even come from enemies. They came from within. People who had once pledged absolute loyalty decided to switch sides. Why? Self-preservation. They saw the tide turning, and they weren't about to sink with the ship. Loyalty, it turns out, was negotiable. And that's when the system truly collapsed. Not when enemies attacked, but when insiders turned traitor. That betrayal carried more weight than any rumor or scandal because it revealed one terrifying truth. There was no longer a unified story to defend. Think about it. What do you do when the very people who built the facade with you start tearing it down piece by piece? There's no script for that. No damage control manual prepared for insiders becoming saboteurs. And here's the cliffhanger. Just when it seemed like things couldn't spiral any further, something entirely unexpected emerged. Not another whisper, not another accusation, but evidence. Tangible, undeniable, impossible to spin. And that evidence didn't just challenge the narrative, it threatened to destroy it completely. What happens when evidence speaks louder than spin? When it's no longer about whispers, suspicions, or accusations, but about hard, undeniable proof that can't be laughed off, silenced, or buried. That's where we are now. The fragile world of carefully constructed illusions finally collides with something far more dangerous: receipts. And this is the turning point, because once evidence enters the game, there's no going back. Imagine it. Files pulled from archives no one was supposed to access. Documents stamped confidential, but somehow leaked into the wrong hands. Photographs that reveal contradictions too glaring to ignore. Even recordings, unfiltered, unedited, that strip away the polished performances and expose the raw, unguarded truth. Doesn't that make your pulse quicken? Because now, it's no longer a battle of words. It's a battle of facts. Here's the contradiction that explodes in this moment. For years, the narrative depended on keeping the public convinced that rumors were baseless, that speculation was nothing more than noise. But now there were dates that didn't match, signatures that didn't line up, stories that fell apart under the weight of cross-reference timelines. And the people who once dismissed skeptics as conspiracy theorists suddenly found themselves without a defense. A shocking fact, some of these leaks came from the inside. That's right, those closest to the core, who swore loyalty in silence, turned out to be the ones dropping the most devastating evidence. Why? Fear. Revenge. desperation. Each motive added fuel to the fire. And together, those motives unleashed a flood no one could stop. Let me ask you directly. If you stumbled upon a piece of evidence that could shatter the most powerful people around you, would you reveal it? Or would you bury it, terrified of the consequences? That's the moral dagger at the heart of this chapter. Evidence doesn't just reveal the truth, it forces choices. Choices that reshape alliances, friendships, and entire reputations. Some insiders chose to fight, others chose to run, and some, they doubled down on denial, insisting the documents were fake, the photos doctored, the recordings manipulated. But the more they screamed fake, the more real it all seemed. And here's where the irony burns. While insiders scrambled to discredit the leaks, the public did the opposite. They scrutinized every detail, matched every date, cross-checked every inconsistency. Social media exploded with threads dissecting timelines, highlighting contradictions, and exposing lies in real time. The narrative wasn't just slipping from their control, it was being rewritten by the very people they once thought would never question them. The emotional stakes? Devastating. Imagine standing in front of the world as your carefully built reputation crumbles. Every denial mocked, every excuse dissected, every word twisted back against you, using the very evidence you thought would never see daylight. One insider described it as living through the slow-motion collapse of everything we thought untouchable. And yet, even as the walls closed in, something darker was brewing. The exposure of evidence didn't just reveal lies, it raised new questions. Why were certain details hidden in the first place? Who benefited from the cover-ups? And, most dangerously, who orchestrated the leaks? Because here's the twist, the evidence didn't just appear randomly. It was timed, released strategically, dropped like bombs at moments calculated to inflict maximum damage. Doesn't that sound like someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes? Someone who knew exactly where the skeletons were buried, and exactly when to drag them out into the light? And this is where everything shifts again. Because the revelation of evidence didn't just expose the truth, it hinted at a mastermind. A shadow figure directing the chaos. Someone with access, with knowledge, with a vendetta. And if that's true, then the story isn't about random leaks at all. It's about a war plan executed with surgical precision. So here's the cliffhanger. If someone on the inside was orchestrating this downfall, the next question is obvious. Who is it? And once that answer surfaces, nothing will ever be the same. What if I told you the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shouting in your face? It's the one smiling at your side while quietly plotting your downfall. That's exactly where we are now. The leaks, the evidence, the unraveling of carefully guarded secrets, they weren't accidents. They weren't coincidences. They were orchestrated. And the deeper you look, the more undeniable it becomes. Someone from the inside was pulling the strings all along. Imagine the shock when whispers about a mole began circulating. At first, they seemed absurd. After all, how could someone embedded so deeply betray the very circle they'd sworn loyalty to? But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Each revelation was too precise, too perfectly timed. The kind of information that only an insider could know. Doesn't that make your blood run cold? Now, here's the contradiction that electrifies this chapter. The very people who prided themselves on absolute control, their ability to silence, to stage, to dictate the narrative, were blindsided by one of their own. They weren't facing an outside enemy. They were facing betrayal from within. And betrayal, as you know, cuts deeper than any external attack. A shocking detail emerged. Certain files, thought to be locked away, had only a handful of authorized viewers. Yet those files were the very ones that slipped into the hands of journalists. Which means the circle of suspects was incredibly small. One insider later admitted, "We realized it could only be one of us." And that was far more terrifying than any tabloid rumor. Let me turn this directly on you. If you were part of an inner circle, and you discovered someone close to you was the traitor, how would you react? Would you hunt them down, expose them, destroy them? Or would you stay quiet, terrified that you might be next on their list? The paranoia was suffocating. Meetings devolved into shouting matches. Longtime allies eyed each other with suspicion. Friendships fractured overnight. Imagine the emotional toll. Sharing a table, smiling for the cameras, while wondering if the person beside you was secretly feeding ammunition to your enemies. It's the stuff of nightmares. But here's the irony. In their frantic scramble to root out the traitor, they only made things worse. New rules, tighter controls, more secrecy. Yet every attempt to tighten the circle only exposed more cracks. Each denial sounded hollow. Each defensive statement reeked of desperation. And the public? They weren't fooled. If anything, the spectacle of paranoia convinced people more than ever that the leaks were true. Now let's talk strategy. Whoever the mole was, they weren't reckless. They were methodical. They knew exactly which details to release first. Small enough to seem harmless, but damaging enough to create doubt. Then, when attention peaked, they dropped the bombshells. Information that couldn't be spun, couldn't be ignored. Doesn't that sound like someone playing chess while everyone else was fumbling with checkers? And here's a chilling possibility. What if the mole wasn't acting alone? What if this was part of a coordinated plan, an alliance of insiders, bound not by loyalty to the circle, but by their hunger to see it burn? The thought alone sent shockwaves through the ranks. Because if one betrayal was destabilizing, the idea of multiple conspirators was catastrophic. The emotional climax of this chapter hits when trust, already shredded, collapses completely. Imagine living in a world where every smile could mask a dagger, where every conversation might be recorded, where every ally might secretly be an enemy. That's the reality now. And once trust dies, unity is impossible. But here's the cliffhanger you didn't see coming. The mole, whoever they were, didn't just want to expose the truth. They wanted to control the story, to shape it, to weaponize it. And that means they weren't just tearing down a narrative. They were building their own. So the burning question isn't just who betrayed the circle. It's why. And the answer to that question will turn this story upside down in ways no one could have imagined. What if betrayal wasn't the end game at all, but only the opening move? That's the chilling realization in this next chapter. The leaks, the documents, the whispers, they weren't simply about tearing down the old story. They were about constructing a new one. A story designed not just to expose, but to manipulate. And once you see the pieces fall into place, the picture is more disturbing than you can imagine. Think about it. Every revelation so far has followed a rhythm. First, small inconsistencies, easy for the public to digest. Then, larger contradictions, impossible to ignore. Finally, explosive evidence, designed to obliterate what came before. Doesn't that feel more like strategy than chance? Because here's the truth, it was strategy. The mole, or perhaps the hidden alliance behind them, wasn't just dismantling the old order. They were seizing control of the narrative for themselves. Here's the contradiction that stings the most. The very same public who had been manipulated for years into believing one polished version of events now found themselves latching onto another, equally constructed one. Outrage turned into obsession. Shock turned into blind loyalty. And in the chaos, nobody stopped to ask the most important question of all: who benefits? A surprising fact, analysts later discovered that the timing of the revelations aligned perfectly with other events meant to distract or redirect public opinion. It wasn't random. It was calculated. Each drop coincided with moments when attention could be maximized, when outrage would drown out competing headlines. Doesn't that sound like someone wasn't just leaking, but orchestrating? Now let's make this personal. If you discovered you'd been lied to by one side, wouldn't you instinctively cling to the opposite narrative, without realizing you might just be walking into another trap? That's the emotional dagger here. The audience, the world, wasn't liberated by the truth. They were simply being guided into a different cage. And here's where irony cuts the deepest. Those who had once condemned manipulation now used it as a weapon. They mastered the art of controlling outrage, of fueling suspicion, of magnifying doubt until it consumed everything else. One insider confessed, it wasn't about the truth anymore. It was about control. And control is all that matters. But let's not ignore the human cost. Those caught in the middle. Individuals who weren't enemies or traitors, just ordinary figures swept into the storm, became collateral damage. Their reputations destroyed. Their families targeted. Their lives turned upside down. Doesn't that reveal the cruelest irony? That the war for truth ended up devouring even those who had nothing to hide. Let me ask you directly. Would you rather live with a comforting lie or a brutal truth that may itself be manipulated? Which poison would you choose? And the paranoia didn't stop. Because as the mole's power grew, Suspicion intensified again. Was this truly the work of one insider? Or was there a larger hand guiding them? Some began to whisper about outside players, powerful figures lurking in the shadows, using the mole as a pawn to advance their own agendas. If that's true, then the betrayal isn't personal at all. It's systemic. The strategy became unmistakable. Destroy the old order, not to liberate, but to replace it. And that realization is the real bombshell. The public, convinced they were finally seeing the truth, were in fact being handed a new performance, just as staged, just as dangerous. And here's the cliffhanger. The next revelation won't just expose hidden facts. It will reveal the architects behind the curtain, the ones who have been shaping the chaos all along. And when their identities come to light, the fallout will be unlike anything we've seen so far. What if the faces we thought were merely players in this drama turned out to be the architects of the entire stage? That's the terrifying realization that explodes in this chapter. Because for the first time, the shadows step forward, and the masterminds who orchestrated the chaos reveal themselves, not through confession, but through the unmistakable fingerprints they've left all over the story. Think about it. Every leak, every perfectly timed revelation, every contradiction magnified into a headline. It all pointed toward an intelligence greater than one rogue insider. Too much precision. Too much calculation. This wasn't the work of a single mole acting out of revenge. This was a design, a blueprint, carried out step by step. Doesn't that make your stomach drop? Because it means the chaos wasn't accidental. It was scripted. And here's the contradiction that twists the knife. While the public believed they were watching a structure collapse, they were really watching a transfer of power. The architects weren't trying to destroy the system. They were trying to take control of it. And the betrayal? It was merely a tool to clear the board of rivals. A shocking fact soon surfaced. Financial trails, obscure but undeniable, linked certain players to networks that had long benefited from scandal. The same names appeared again and again, funding the machinery of exposure, ensuring the right stories hit the right outlets at the right time. And once those names emerged, the illusion shattered. Because these weren't outsiders. They were insiders hiding in plain sight, smiling for the cameras while quietly orchestrating destruction from behind the curtain. Let me put the question directly to you. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to discover they were the very reason your world was falling apart? How would you feel, knowing the hand that guided you was the same hand that pushed you over the edge? That's the gut punch of this chapter. The emotional stakes skyrocket here. Allies realized they were pawns. Enemies realized they were manipulated into fighting the wrong battles. And the architects? They sit silently, watching the world tear itself apart, secure in the knowledge that they're the only ones who understand the true game being played. And here's where irony bites hardest. The architects didn't just manipulate their rivals, they manipulated the audience, too. Every scandal, every twist, every revelation was designed not only to weaken those in power, but also to hook you, the public, deeper into their story. Outrage was their fuel. Attention was their weapon. And every headline we devoured brought us closer to their intended outcome. But here's the twist that deepens the wound. The architects didn't just plan to reveal the truth. They planned to control it forever. To position themselves as the saviors, the ones who exposed corruption, while quietly building their own empire on the ashes. Doesn't that sound like the perfect crime? Expose your enemies, manipulate the crowd into cheering, then crown yourself as the hero. Now, let's not forget the collateral damage. Those who thought they were whistleblowers, truth-tellers, or even victims were nothing more than pawns in a grander scheme. Their suffering wasn't an accident. It was part of the plan. And the architects? They never once looked back. The emotional breaking point of this chapter comes when even the staunchest loyalists, those who defended the old story to the bitter end, realized they were protecting the wrong people all along. Imagine the devastation of realizing your loyalty was wasted. Your faith was exploited. Your trust weaponized. But just when you think you've grasped the full scope of their power, another layer emerges. Because the architects weren't united either. And within their shadowy alliance, rivalries were already brewing. Betrayals within betrayals. Secrets within secrets. And that leads us to the cliffhanger. If the masterminds themselves can't hold their alliance together, then the next phase won't just be about exposure. It'll be about war. A war not for truth, but for domination. What happens when the puppet masters turn on each other? When the very alliance that engineered betrayal, leaks, and carefully timed revelations starts to splinter under the weight of its own ambition. That's where this story now barrels forward, into the brutal unraveling of the architects themselves. Because here's the irony. Those who thrive on manipulation eventually become victims of their own game. Imagine the scene. The architects, once invisible, powerful, smug in their control, now begin to fracture. Greed seeps in, ego festers, and suddenly, the unity that seemed unshakable starts cracking. One wants more credit. Another demands a larger share of the spoils. A third insists their agenda should take precedence over all others. Doesn't that sound familiar? It's the oldest story of power. Alliances built on ambition always collapse when the prize is in sight. Here's the contradiction that makes this chapter so volatile. For years, the architects thrived on division, encouraging others to tear each other apart. But now, the very strategy they perfected turns inward. Their tactics, secrecy, leaks, manipulation, are weaponized against each other. And the world, once oblivious to their existence, begins to glimpse their implosion. Shocking detail. Internal memos and encrypted messages later revealed just how vicious these betrayals became. Hidden recordings of closed-door arguments leaked, not to the press this time, but strategically planted within rival camps. Imagine the paranoia. Imagine sitting in a meeting, wondering which of your allies is secretly recording you for leverage. Direct question for you. If you knew your closest ally was just waiting for the right moment to stab you in the back, would you strike first, or gamble on their loyalty, holding out a little longer? That's the emotional heartbeat here. Mistrust so suffocating it borders on madness. Allies turned enemies, circling one another, each convinced the others are plotting. And the fallout? Catastrophic. The irony is relentless. The architects had perfected control over the narrative when dealing with outsiders, but when they turned on each other, there was no unified script to fall back on. Lies overlapped. Stories contradicted. Cover-ups collided. And instead of clarity, chaos reigned. The very chaos they once used to dominate their rivals now consumed them. And here's the twist that escalates everything. The leaks didn't stop. They multiplied. Only this time, they weren't about tearing down the old system. They were about destroying each other. Each faction trying to expose the others first. Each desperate to seize the upper hand by dropping the most explosive revelations. Doesn't that sound like a ticking time bomb? Each new explosion louder than the last? The emotional stakes couldn't be higher. Reputations obliterated. Alliances obliterated. Even families dragged into the mud. Because once betrayal starts, it doesn't stop at professional rivalries. It seeps into every personal connection, every bond, every ounce of trust. And the most devastating part? The public, once captivated by the truth being revealed, suddenly realizes they've been watching not a noble crusade, but a cannibalistic war. The shock turns into disillusionment. The applause turns into suspicion. And for the first time, the architect's grip on the narrative slips completely. But here's the cliffhanger. The implosion of their alliance doesn't just leave chaos in its wake. It creates a vacuum, a void of power. And in history, voids never last long. Someone always rises to fill them. The only question is, who will seize it? And the answer to that will shift the entire course of this story in ways that no one, not even the architects, could have foreseen. What if the collapse of the architects' alliance wasn't the end, but the beginning of something even more dangerous? Because that's what happens when power vacuums open. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does ambition. When the old order implodes, When the masterminds destroy one another in a cannibalistic frenzy, there is always someone waiting in the shadows, ready to step into the void. And this chapter is about that rise, an unexpected, ruthless ascent that flips the game on its head. Picture the scene. The public, exhausted by scandal after scandal, begins to crave stability. The architect's implosion has left nothing but rubble, shattered reputations, exposed lies, fractured loyalties. People who once swore allegiance to the old guard now look around desperately for someone, anyone, to restore order. And right there, in the chaos, a new figure emerges. Someone underestimated. Someone overlooked. Someone who, until now, played the long game in silence. Doesn't it always happen this way? The moment the giants fall, the overlooked rise. The audience shifts its gaze. And the person stepping forward isn't necessarily the most honest or the most capable. It's the one who best understands the hunger of the crowd. Here's the contradiction that makes this moment so compelling. The public thinks they're finally choosing for themselves. That after years of manipulation, they're at last rejecting the false narratives. But in reality, they're being courted by another story, sleeker, fresher, more seductive. A story designed to make them feel empowered while subtly guiding them into yet another trap. Shocking fact, some of the very evidence used to topple the architects wasn't leaked by enemies at all, but by this new contender, strategically waiting for their moment. Imagine the calculation, the patience required to sit quietly while others devoured each other, only to strike when the field was clear. It's not just ambition. It's cold-blooded genius. Direct question for you. If you had the chance to seize absolute control after watching your rivals self-destruct, would you hesitate? Or would you step over their ashes without a second thought? The emotional stakes rise again. Those who once thought they were free realize they've merely traded one master for another. The sense of betrayal deepens, but so does the seduction. Because this new figure, unlike the architects, knows how to weaponize charm. They don't rule through fear alone. They rule through admiration. Doesn't that make them even more dangerous? And here's the irony. While the architects fought tooth and nail to control the narrative, this new player doesn't need to fight. They let the narrative come to them. Their rise is framed as organic, inevitable, the will of the people. In truth, it's anything but. Every step has been planned. Every move calculated. Every illusion carefully polished. But here's the twist that changes everything. This isn't just about replacing the old power structure. It's about rewriting the story from the ground up, erasing what came before, recasting villains as martyrs, traitors as visionaries, chaos as destiny. And once the rewriting begins, the line between truth and fiction blurs completely. The emotional breaking point here comes for those who believed they had finally uncovered the truth. They realized the bitter reality: they've been played again, manipulated into becoming pawns in yet another game. And that realization cuts deeper than any betrayal before. And just when you think the rise is complete, another revelation detonates. Because this new figure isn't stepping forward alone. They have backers, silent partners, an entire network ready to prop them up. Which means the game isn't over. It's escalating into an even larger battle. And here's the cliffhanger. If the old order's destruction was shocking, the war for control of this new order will be catastrophic. Because what's coming next won't just shake the system. It will burn it to the ground. What if burning it all down wasn't a byproduct of the chaos, but the actual goal all along? That's the terrifying realization this chapter forces us to confront. The rise of the new power isn't about restoration, healing, or justice. It's about total domination, about dismantling every last vestige of the old system and replacing it with something unrecognizable, something far more ruthless. Picture the atmosphere now. Where there was once scandal fatigue, there is now open fury. People who once sat quietly on the sidelines are shouting in the streets. The press, once complicit in protecting the architects, has turned rabid, chasing every new revelation with bloodthirsty zeal. And those who thought they were safe, they find themselves dragged into the fire, their secrets exposed in the frenzy. Doesn't it feel like revolution? Here's the contradiction that makes this moment so volatile. The public believes they are tearing down corruption. But in truth, they are tearing down stability itself. Because behind their righteous anger, the new power quietly fans the flames, ensuring chaos spreads faster than truth ever could. They don't just benefit from destruction, they depend on it. A shocking detail: leaked correspondence showed that some of the most damning exposés released in this period weren't spontaneous at all. They were coordinated, timed, carefully staged to maximize outrage. Headlines weren't following the chaos, they were driving it. Imagine realizing that even rebellion itself was choreographed. Let me ask you this directly. If you discovered the very anger fueling you had been manufactured, would it change how you acted? Or would you lean into it anyway, knowing the system you hated was finally collapsing? That's the emotional sting here. The sense of empowerment feels real. The cries for justice sound righteous. But all of it, every chant, every headline, every rallying cry, feeds directly into the hands of the new order. And the public, convinced they are finally in control, are being manipulated more deeply than ever before. And here's the irony. The old architects, once masters of deception, now watch helplessly as their own tactics are used against them with even greater precision. They built the stage for manipulation, and now they're being crushed beneath the very machinery they created. Doesn't that feel like poetic justice? Twisted, but undeniable? But let's not forget the collateral victims. Ordinary families, innocent figures, even loyalists who never played in the games of power, all consumed by the inferno. Their lives ruined, reputations torched, futures obliterated. Because when systems collapse, they don't just take down the guilty. They devour the innocent, too. The emotional breaking point of this chapter comes when insiders, those who once fought fiercely to preserve the system, realize they've lost. Completely. Utterly. The war isn't about defending what was. It's about surviving what comes next. And for many, survival means surrender. Here's the twist. The new power doesn't just want dominance. They want erasure. Every record, every symbol, every remnant of the old order is targeted. History itself is rewritten in real time. And once history is rewritten, who can say what's true anymore? Doesn't that make the victory absolute? But here's the cliffhanger. Just when the new order seems unstoppable, a new challenger appears. Not from within the old guard, not from the architect's ashes, but from an entirely unexpected place. A figure no one saw coming, holding a truth so explosive it threatens not just the new regime, but the entire narrative we've been fed since the beginning. And when that truth surfaces, the story we thought we were following will be turned inside out. What if the greatest threat to the new order didn't come from its enemies, but from an outsider with nothing to lose? That's the shockwave that rips through this chapter. Just as the new power cements its grip, rewriting history and silencing rivals, a figure emerges who isn't bound by the old loyalties, isn't complicit in the architect's betrayals, and isn't seduced by promises of control. A wild card. And in a game built on scripts, wild cards are deadly. Picture the moment. The new order believes it has triumphed. The narrative has been seized, the public enthralled, the old guard annihilated. And then, an unexpected voice rises. At first, it seems irrelevant. A lone figure dismissed as unimportant, out of touch, powerless. But they carry something no one else does. Undeniable truth. The kind that doesn't need spin. The kind that doesn't require manipulation. The kind that, once spoken aloud, resonates so deeply it can't be ignored. Here's the contradiction. In a world where everyone is screaming, the quiet, unfiltered truth becomes the loudest sound of all. And the more the new order tries to drown it out, the more powerful it becomes. Doesn't that feel familiar? How often has history shown us that revolutions don't fall because of armies? They fall because of ideas. A shocking detail. Records later revealed that this outsider's evidence wasn't new. It had been there all along, buried beneath lies and distractions. But while others were too busy chasing power or defending their image, this figure was patient, waiting, watching, gathering what everyone else overlooked. And when the time was right, they unleashed it like a thunderclap. Let me ask you directly. If you held the truth in your hands, truth that could expose everyone, topple everything, would you risk your life to reveal it? Or would fear silence you, knowing the storm you'd unleash could never be contained? That's the emotional dagger at the heart of this chapter. The outsider makes the choice no one else dared to make, to reveal everything, consequences be damned. And the effect is seismic. Suddenly, the polished narrative of the new order shatters. Doubt spreads like wildfire. The public, once enthralled, begins to question again. And once doubt enters the bloodstream, it's impossible to purge. Here's the irony. The New Order had planned for enemies. They had prepared for rivals. But they hadn't planned for someone who didn't want power. Someone who didn't care about control. Someone who wanted only to burn away the lies and let the truth stand on its own. In a world addicted to manipulation, that kind of purity is terrifying. And yet, the twist is even darker. Because the truth this outsider carries doesn't just undermine the New Order, it rewrites the entire story. It reveals that both the architects and their successors were building on the same rotten foundation, that the lies go deeper than anyone imagined. And if that's true, then everything, the betrayals, the scandals, the power struggles, was just a distraction from the real secret buried at the core. The emotional stakes skyrocket here. The public reels. Insiders panic. The New Order scrambles to discredit the outsider, branding them a liar, a traitor, a fraud. But every attempt only makes the outsider's words ring truer. And with each passing day, their following grows. And here's the cliffhanger. The outsider's revelation ends not with answers, but with a haunting question. A question so simple, so devastating, that it leaves everyone reeling. If everything we've been told was a lie, then what else are they hiding? And that question doesn't just shake faith in the New Order. It threatens to unravel the entire system itself. What if the outsider's question wasn't just rhetorical, but the key to unlocking the deepest, darkest secret of them all? That's where the story sharpens now. Because once that haunting question is asked, what else are they hiding? Suspicion metastasizes. Every story is questioned. Every official record is doubted. And every powerful figure, old or new, finds themselves under a microscope. Imagine the atmosphere. The public, already exhausted from years of manipulation, suddenly realizes they've only been scratching the surface. If the outsider could reveal one hidden truth, then surely there are more. Truths bigger, uglier, more dangerous than anyone dared to imagine. And so begins the frenzy. People dig. Journalists hunt. Insiders panic. Doesn't it feel like the ground itself is shifting under their feet? Here's the contradiction that fuels this chapter. The New Order thought the outsider's revelations would be their undoing. But in truth, it's worse than that. It doesn't just challenge their power, it undermines the very concept of trust. When everything is suspect, nothing is safe. And when nothing is safe, no one can rule. A shocking detail emerges. Hidden files, thought to be erased, begin surfacing in unexpected places. Anonymous drops to reporters. Encrypted data leaks online. And within those files are details so explosive they don't just implicate individuals. They suggest an entire machinery of lies spanning decades. Suddenly, it's no longer about who holds power. It's about whether power itself was ever legitimate. Let me turn this directly on you. If you discovered the entire system, every headline, every image, every carefully rehearsed story, was built on deceit from the ground up, would you cling to the fragments you know? Or would you demand it all burn to the ground so something new could rise? That's the emotional core here. People feel betrayed not once, but endlessly. Betrayed by the old architects. Betrayed by the New Order. And now betrayed by the very idea that truth was ever within reach. The outrage isn't just directed at leaders anymore. It turns inward, at the blindness, the gullibility, the complicity of believing for so long. Doesn't that sting more than any scandal? And here's the irony. The outsider, who revealed the initial truth, suddenly becomes both a hero and a threat. Loved by those who see them as a liberator. Hated by those who fear the chaos they've unleashed. Because exposing lies doesn't just dismantle power, it dismantles certainty. And human beings crave certainty, even when it's false. Now comes the twist. Within the leaked files is a revelation so shocking it reframes everything we thought we knew. It's not just about individuals manipulating narratives. It's about an institutional conspiracy, something larger than any one figure, spanning generations, designed not just to control perception, but to engineer reality itself. And once that comes to light, the story explodes into something far bigger than scandals or betrayals. The emotional stakes skyrocket here. Insiders scramble, not just to protect themselves, but to protect the very idea of legitimacy. Historians are forced to reconsider records once thought ironclad. Journalists face backlash for having been complicit, knowingly or not. And the public? They spiral into outrage, disbelief, and a gnawing hunger for more. And here's the cliffhanger. Just when you think the biggest secrets are out, the outsider drops a final bombshell. A simple phrase, spoken with deadly calm. This isn't the whole truth. It's only the beginning. And with that, the question shifts again. If all we've uncovered so far is just the surface, what horrors still lie beneath? What if everything so far, the betrayals, the leaks, the rise and fall of powers, even the outsider's revelations, wasn't the full story at all, but merely the opening act of something far more sinister? That's where this chapter drives us. Because when the outsider whispered, "This is only the beginning," it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. A promise that what lay beneath the surface would shake the very foundations of reality itself. Picture the moment. The world, already reeling, now sits on edge. Doubt infects everything. Every headline is questioned. Every official story is dissected. And in that atmosphere of paranoia, the outsider unveils the next layer. Not just hidden files, not just leaked documents, but proof of a design so vast, so insidious, that it reframes every event we've discussed up to now. Doesn't that feel like staring into the abyss, realizing the darkness has no bottom? Here's the contradiction. The public thought they wanted the truth. They demanded it, shouted for it, tore down empires to get it. But now, faced with the enormity of what's being revealed, many find themselves wishing they'd never asked. Because the truth isn't liberating, it's horrifying. A shocking detail emerges. Long-buried archives reveal evidence of manipulation stretching back decades, even centuries. Generations of power players, each perpetuating the same cycle of lies, betrayal, and control, dressed up in different faces, but always the same script. The scandals weren't anomalies. They were the system working exactly as designed. Let me ask you directly. If you learned that history itself, your history, was written not as it happened, but as those in power wanted you to believe, would you still trust anything? Or would you tear it all down, even if it meant living in chaos? That's the emotional breaking point here. The public, once craving answers, now drowns in despair. It's no longer just betrayal by individuals or even institutions. It's betrayal by the very idea of truth itself. Doesn't that sting more than anything so far? And here's the irony. The outsider, once seen as a savior, now becomes a threat to stability itself. Because the truth they bring doesn't unite, it fractures. Families split. Friends argue. Communities implode. Some rally behind the outsider, convinced exposure is the only path to freedom. Others brand them a destroyer, a harbinger of collapse. And through it all, the outsider stands firm, refusing to bend. But here comes the twist. The outsider reveals that the conspiracy wasn't just about control of narratives. It was about control of outcomes. Events weren't merely spun, they were engineered.